there is not going to be any African cinema until the artists begin to connect to African traditional culture. African masks, for example, African sculpture, for example. There is no art, there is no cinema, African cinema, without the spiritual knowledge of the African culture. There is no African cinema without us understanding our psychological relationship to color. There is no African cinema without understanding our relationship to the forces of nature, rain, cloud, smoke, fog, flood. There is no any African cinema without understanding the soil and the human beings. There is no African cinema without understanding the shamane. You know, the shamane. The shamane in Ethiopia knows more about color than the filmmakers. Shamane is no more, the weaver, knows more about color arrangement than many artists, Ethiopian artists who studied in Europe. I'm not saying they don't know anything about art. Their notion of color comes from Europe. The shamane guy is local. He is barefoot under our nose, configuring colors. Tilat, for example. What do you think tilat? Tilat is an artwork that plays with colors. Some of it traditional, strict, some improvisational tilat. How many Ethiopians study tilat in art schools? Nobody studies tilat. Nobody studies shamane. You know, how many Ethiopians really study traditional music before they grab the guitar? You know, we're easy, it's good for us, it's very easy for us to take European instrument, but how many of us transform our instrument that have certain particular sounds that have particular relationship to us? You know, it's like I don't know if I told you this before, when I was in Gondar, when I liked girls, I hear flute, the peasant flute, Yerrenya flute, I would hear, Washington. That even rites of passage, that human sexuality of liking a girl was triggered by, or accompanied at least by, Washington. How many of us, it's easy for me to jump into trumpet and saxophone, etc., but how many of us transform our traditional instrument with all its social, cultural, psychological implication? Very few. In Africa, this is the problem. Now, if we don't do that, if we just study Truffaut, you know, Orson Welles, you know, Eisenstein, and think we're making African cinema, no. I think we should study the technology. It's in universal wealth. But primarily, if we want Ethiopian cinema, if we want Senegalese cinema, if we want South African cinema, we have to study local implications of culture, meanings of cloud. You know, meanings of how many of us know how to Hilm Maftat, for example, to anti-dream? You know, my mother, my grandmother, they were the best interpreters. They speak for 2 hours about one woman's 5-second dream, reading the primary, secondary, and tertiary meaning of the dream. You know, how many of the Ethiopian cultural people now, the playwrights, how many of the painters, how many of the novelists, how many of the playwrights, how many of us study Hilm Maftat? You know, you've seen this yourself. How many of us study Hilm Maftat? To me, that's why, no, let me say it this way. For me to be a good filmmaker, from the origin where I've come from, I have to study those things additionally besides studying the technology. To be a filmmaker, these are the homeworks you have to study as you make film or before you make film, whichever ways your historical reality is. For me, I have begun to take seriously Hilm, Finjal. I've begun to take seriously the work of the shamane, how he composes kuta, kamis, how he quilts tilat, because I think that's literature. Telling a story in film is quilting. Tilat, no. You're quilting a plot. you know. The peasant, if you look at the peasant, for example, you know, the peasant, when he's harvesting, he's plotting the land, you know. There's a certain culture and tradition that goes along with the way he deals with land. There's the spiritual aspect, there's the material aspect. And then if I want to do a film about peasants, shouldn't I know that? Yes, I should know that. And so basically, yes, there's African cinema, but there's lazy filmmakers in Africa because we hate to do the homework. We prefer the way we are romanticized by Europeans for Europeans, anything we do, as long as it has black people in it moving in and out, it's a black story, it's an African story. But if we really look at the metrics of the language or the way the film is structured, we will find out it may be just some Francophone French film or American film being imitated by Africans. And so yes, I have a big belief in African cinema because I've seen it in my own work, little bit, not all the way, but I have seen it. But I also know its cultural implication, the kind of homework I have to do. If I was a painter, I would study traditional, it doesn't matter, even if I went to school in France or America or Belgium, Germany, it doesn't matter. Still, you can go back. I remember these Ethiopian musicians, you know, they came and said to me, we'd like to work with you. We'd like to do, you know, music, etc. with you. What do you say? I said, listen, I would work with you, but you need to go to Ethiopia now. You need to travel all over Ethiopia. You need to study the regional music of Ethiopia. You need to study every instrument. You should see the relationship of the landscape to the instrument of Ethiopian music. You need to go to the church and hear. Now you have a degree in your European school. Now localize it, study it, even if it's backwards. Do it that way and come because you have the technology, the science of European music. Now get the traditional music in your pocket and you'll be the best musician because the synthesis of what you're going to do will be revolutionary in music. But often what it does is, if I know European music, I look down upon the peasants. The Ethiopian, barefoot Ethiopians have nothing to give me. I remember doing Adwa, certain professors said to me, who do you have in the film being interviewed? I told them, Professor so-and-so, and I have all this, people at the mountain in Adwa, some elders on the woods of Ethiopia, on the way to Adwa, and they say, you got all the you got all the Tursi Mursi, to tell history, you got all this, what do you call them, Turkey Murky, to tell a story. I'm not going to be part of this kind of movie, This is serious, otherwise it's serious, otherwise a serious history. But what he forgets is, he's footnoting the French, he's footnoting the Italians, the very people we defeated, as if they are objective, absolutely. And he doesn't take into consideration the popular history of Ethiopians, who comes through peasants, through church people, not to ever be forgotten. And then the ultimate joke of it is, when you go to Adwa, a lot of the professors don't know where the battle, they know it by book, in the map. But physically they don't know where the battle took place, where they don't know Tahaitu was, where they don't know where Alula was, where they don't know Minilik was. Yet the old people at the mountain of Adwa will tell you, right there, pointing their fingers, the way Dimbleby from BBC would do, confidently will tell you where things happened. And so the synthesis is a key. Ethiopian intellectuals, African intellectuals, in music, in any endeavor, if we don't synthesize what we learned, in some occasions we have to even unlearn. We have to undegreeize ourselves. The degree, this whole general so-and-so, like a military degree with PhD, MA, all that has to be really re-questioned and revisited and localized. And then the revolution or dramatic society emerges, that you could see our grandparents in films vibrating with stories. And then the world sitting down watching it normal, not not tokenistically, not patronizingly, but with something, with respect. That's African cinema. That's when the African cinema rises up. Now I think it's imperfectly dwindling all over the place. Here and there we see the glimpse of it. I think most of the films are just fraudulently African by force. You know, we claim, I say, this is an Ethiopian film. And what happens? A European man, when I tell him, I'm from Ethiopia, I know better than you, what is he going to say? I say, it's an Ethiopian film, that's what it is. But if you ask, you know, if you ask our folks and say, how do you relate to this film? You know, does this film speak to you? In what way? And, you know, even to have our imagination be understood, we have to localize it within the knowledge of the traditional aesthetic principles.